Historians of Reddit, what is the biggest fuck you moment in history? Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, one of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send a very fast-working one to Moscow, and I certainly won't have to send another. Tito to Joseph Stalin. If someone made a black comedy TV series about the Eastern Bloc, this would be one of the highlights. Ferruccio Lamborghini was a rich man owning his company that built tractors. He talked to Ferrari about the imperfections of his car and how to improve them, and they basically laughed at a young tractor mechanic trying to tell them about sport cars. So he decided to start making luxury sport cars to compete with Ferrari, and thus, the rivalry was born. So I'd say the middle finger of this guy to Ferrari was pretty noticeable. When Ford was about to buy Ferrari and noticed something in the paperwork that said Ford would not own the Ferrari race team, they were upset about this, and Enzo basically said Ford was too low to own such a great team. Later on, Ford recruits Shelby Carroll and beats Ferrari at Le Mans, and has every single time since they've entered a car. Here's the TLDR if you don't want to read the Wikipedia article. It's 1976. Some Americans at the Korean DMZ are cutting down a tree that obscures their vision to the North Korean side. A couple of North Koreans come out and kill a few Americans with their own axe. The Americans and South Koreans come back with such a massive show of force, it's not even funny. Bombers, jet planes, 27 helicopters, a full aircraft carrier moved off the coast. Thousands of troops, troop carriers, commandos, all just to send in a squad of army engineers with chainsaws to cut down that goddamn tree. I would highly recommend giving the forces used part of the Wikipedia article a read. It's riveting and hilarious. Don't forget, a general involved had the tree carved into a swagger stick. And they left the 6-foot-high stump, so you can't forget about the tree. Some of the first South Koreans to dismount also had claymore mines strapped to their chests and were cursing and daring the northern soldiers a short distance away to attack. The balls of those men. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Olga of Kiev. When her husband died, the country that killed him assumed they'd just take over and force her into marriage. She straight up killed the dignitaries that were sent to tell her she had to marry, multiple times in the most petty way. She then traveled to where her husband had been killed and basically burnt the place to the ground, again, in the most petty, amazing way. They made her a freaking saint. Worth the read on Wikipedia. I saw Salmonella's video on her. He also mentioned how she dropped lots of seeds, so all the pigeons in a village would get in a huge flock. She'd get some flammable string attached to their little legs, so when they went home to their nests, they'd catch on fire, and that's how she burned the whole village. Clarifying, she requested something like 2 pigeons and a sparrow from each house as an apology capitulation gift. Once given the birds, she tied burning sulfur to their feet and released them to roost. The construction and use of the Warwolf, supposedly the largest trebuchet ever built. When it was disassembled, it would fill up 30 wagons. So anyways, King Edward I built this to siege a Scottish castle. But before it was even built, the Scottish people tried to surrender. To which Edward responded with a prompt no. In actuality, he responded with, "You do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will." In other words, I built this trebuchet over 40 days and I am most definitely going to use it, and proceeded to use the trebuchet anyways. Edit, well, now I have to go watch Outlaw King. I went to all the trouble to build this dank trebuchet, and now you bet your ass I'm attested. You could have surrendered when I asked, you could have surrendered a week in. But after 40 days there's no take-backsies. My personal favorite, the beginning of the Battle of Stamford Bridge, in England, 1066. England's been invaded by a Norwegian army led by Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, and Tostig Godwinson, exiled English Earl and estranged brother to the English king. They've already fought one battle, they've captured York. Things are looking good for them. They're chilling, enjoying their success, waiting at Stamford Bridge for the hostages they demanded. It's a hot day. They're not expecting any trouble. But wait, an English army shows up. That's practically impossible. The Battle of Fulford Gate had taken place only 5 days ago, and the Norwegians had completely routed the forces of the Northern Earls. The rest of the English army was known to be in the south, awaiting a Norman invasion. Turns out the English had ridden all the way up north in 4 days. The Norwegians were, understandably, a bit unhappy. They form into a circle. They don't have their armor with them, it's at the ships. It's too hot to be hanging around in mail. They've got helmets and shields and weaponry, and that's it. The English send a writer to negotiate. He tells Tostig that his brother the king is willing to offer him his earldom back and part of the rule of England if he gives up now. Tostig asks what his buddy Harold Hardrada gets for his trouble. 6 feet of English ground, or as much more as he needs, being taller than other men. Tostig says they're done here. The writer rides away. Harold Hardrada asks who that dude was, because if it had been him talking, he'd have just killed the bastard there. Tostig says, "Oh, that's my brother. That's Harold Godwinson, the king." Harold Godwinson rode up to an enemy army personally and told the king of Norway, known to be a great warrior in general, that all he'd get from this invasion was a grave. Battle commences. Norwegians lose. Tostig and Harold Hardrada both die. Huge bloody mess. English army is crippled. And then 3 days later the Normans land in the south. Harold is fucked. He still marches his army back, gathers as much force as he can, and engages 3 weeks later. He's killed at Hastings. Normans conquer England. Basically a very personal fucky moment that snowballed quite intensely. Edit, because a lot of people are asking, yes, this was the battle with the legendary berserker at the bridge. No, it probably didn't actually happen. The story appears hundreds of years later and is very inconsistent. Also, there might not have been an actual bridge there at the time. The Second Defenestration of Prague. The Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia sends representatives to the Protestant city of Prague, telling them to convert to Catholicism. The representatives get thrown out a window and allegedly landed in a pile of manure. The Battle of Alesia. Julius Caesar's attacking some Gauls in modern-day France, and they go hide in a castle on top of a hill. Caesar's army isn't big enough to take them all at once, and the Gauls have reinforcements coming, so siege is impossible. So Caesar just builds a bigger castle around the one he's attacking. He literally just built 2 walls back to back and a ring around the castle. The first Gaul army was already too small to defeat Caesar, and his fortifications only gave him a greater advantage. The reinforcements were also unable to defeat Caesar's army now that he was behind several layers of spike pits and both earthen and wooden walls. Plus the Gauls inside had no way to communicate with the reinforcements outside, so they couldn't coordinate attacks. Both Gallic armies were defeated as they attacked Caesar's newly built fortifications, and Caesar emerged victorious. It's probably my favorite battle of all time. The Romans had to build over 20 miles of walls, right? And they did it really fast. Crazy fast. I still don't get how you can build such an enormous structure in such a short span of time. I guess he did have a literal army building it, which helps. Not the biggest, probably, but the first that came to mind. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's response to the Nazi demand that Bastogne surrender. Nuts. Nuts. The general's word echo clear. Nuts. The Nazis shall hear. When Germanic tribes invaded Britain after the Romans left, they named the natives Celts Welsk, meaning foreigner, even though they themselves were the foreigners. That later became the word Welsh, which the English promptly adopted for phrases like Welch on a bed. TLDR. All of history has been one giant etymological middle finger to the Welsh. Yeah, but the Welsh language is itself a middle finger to English speakers. French surrender in World War II. Hitler dictates that the French capitulation take place at Compiègne, a forest north of Paris. This is the same spot where 22 years earlier the Germans had signed the armistice ending World War I. Hitler intends to disgrace the French and avenge the German defeat. To further deepen the humiliation, he orders that the signing ceremony take place in the same railroad car that hosted the earlier surrender. The armistice is signed on June 22. Under its terms, 2/3 of France is to be occupied by the Germans. The French army is to be disbanded. In addition, France must bear the cost of the German invasion. I was hoping someone would post this. Hitler later destroyed the railroad carriage when things started going south for the Axis. Because how hilariously shitty would it have been to make them sign the next treaty in the same fucking railroad car? Julius Caesar's death. At least he died surrounded by friends. The first recorded incident of a group project where most of the group doesn't do the fucking work. I love it because there are several levels. There were about 40 conspirators. Caesar received 23 stab wounds. So right off the bat, and not even accounting for people managing to stab him multiple times, about half the folks involved did jack shit. But then later his body was examined, and the doctor concluded that only one of those was properly fatal on its own. Even of the people that actually did any work at all, just one got it right and didn't half-ass things. That's a group project. The Siege of Tyre. Basically, Alexander the Great was unable to capture the city because it was on an island, so he made it into a peninsula to be able to properly attack. It is said that Alexander was so enraged at the Tyrians' defense of their city and the loss of his men that he destroyed half the city. That was a pretty big fuck you to Tyre, and I love this comic representation of the events by Floric off cows. I can't beat the shit out of you without getting closer. Ha ho, then come as close as you want.